right, so I've got the recorder on. We'll go ahead and get started. So in this one, I'm doing an overview of purchasing states, which is just going to help us understand where our documents are. And then for custom views, so hopefully some of our more experienced users are using custom views. If not, this would be really helpful to see what we've got going. So before I get into the presentation, I always have to show that the website I've built, the slide deck for this is on the website. So if we go to INTACCT into recent, I have that added there. And then the slides on the class dimension and some of the other stuff I've done recently, which is the MARTIS training and some accounts receivable training, is also available in the recent session, or you can go to different topics to learn more about INTACCT or MARTIS. On my training website, on the homepage, I have a form people can fill out if there's certain types of training you want me to try to address. I can do it by video here or schedule a class at some point. Recently, we got enough requests that in June, I'll be doing some Workforce Go training on different variations of Workforce Go reports and probably editing timesheets from the looks of how some of our payroll has gone recently. But yeah, if you ever have any suggestions to make this site better, please let me know. So we get into purchasing states. On my presentation here, anything that has an underline and kind of a little different color, if you go to the website to download the presentation, these are hyperlinks. So it'll take you to the section in the slide deck, or it'll actually take you to the INTACCT help desk to be able to see what those things mean. But so we're going to cover purchasing approvals. I got a few workflows that we're going to go over. So you can see them there. I'm going to go over the purchasing document states and what those mean. Purchasing document approval history and custom views, how we use them, what they do, and then we're going to go through an example of making one. So we get into purchasing workflows. The first one I want to go over is the purchase requisition. It's pretty much a three-step process that happens in which a user submits a request. That request goes to a program director or that person's delegate. When that person approves, it goes to the next person, the program monitor. So we all know that, but some of the stuff that helps us find out where our documents are sitting are the states. And so I put a little column in here that tells us the state that might be showing, and it tells us where it is. So when it comes to a purchase requisition, if we have a state that says submitted, we know that the user has submitted a document. If it's declined, it means one of the two approvers have declined that request. And at that point, to fix that, the user can edit it and resubmit it. If it says pending, that means it's gone through the full approval process, it's completely approved, and it's waiting for the user to convert it to a purchase order. Or if it says draft, that's a document we're working on that we've saved for later, and we can always come back, edit, and submit that draft. So if we see any of these four states, it typically tells us it's user related at that point. For a program director or delegate, when it reaches this far, the state will always say submitted. So if we're in the standard purchase requisition workflow, we see a document that says submitted, that's indicator to us that it's with the first person that has to approve your request. So if it's through the courts, Christy might have submitted something, it's waiting for Cheryl to approve, so on. At that point, they have the option to approve or decline. If they decline, status goes to declined, and now it's up to the user to take action. If the program director approves, the status changes to partially approved. And so when we're looking at our standard purchase requisition workflow, anytime that it says partially approved, that means it's waiting for one of the program monitors to approve that document. For standard purchase requisitions, Partially approved will never mean anything else. It means it's with the monitor. So if we're in INTACCT, and I go to the purchase requisition workflow, let's change this to all. We can see the states here. And if you want to know immediately without having to send an email to somebody or any of that, we can see a handful of partially approved stuff, but we know that all of these requests are waiting for a program monitor to approve. So if this were something we were trying to push to go through faster, like these are dated 5/21, so they're 5 days old, and if we're waiting to get something approved, we know it's with our monitor. Now we can reach out to the monitor and ask for them to approve instead of asking them who we're waiting for it to be approved by. We see documents with pending, meaning it's been fully approved. Here's converted, meaning we've done our job. And then here's submitted right here, which is waiting for the program director to approve. So you can easily see where your document is standing by visiting whichever purchasing workflow correlates to what your request. Contract services requisitions are a lot different. The user stuff never changes. Those are the states we'll see, whether they've submitted it, had a request declined, it's been fully approved, so it's pending, or they've saved it as a draft. So that document, if it says submitted, meaning it's gone to the program director or their delegate, these are all things waiting for the program director to approve or decline. But one of the things that we see now is there's a lot more people in this workflow, but the document state is going to be the same for any of those 4 people. So whether it's the program monitor, if they've approved and it's gone on to the CFO, it's still going to say partially approved. If the CFO has approved and it's waiting with the treasurer, it'll still say partially approved. And if that person has approved and it's gone down to the vice president, it'll still say partially approved. So that can be more confusing, trying to figure out where your contract sits. And so we'll take a look at that, what else you can do here at the end of this. But again, for this workflow, all the states mean the same thing. Once one of the approvers has made an approval, it switches to partially approved, meaning it's waiting for one or more of the next group of people to approve or review the document. If you use the justification workflow, the user still has the same stuff, but it doesn't go to the program director. So for anyone who's done a justification now at this point, the program director and the treasurer approvals for this particular type of request are done outside of INTACCT. We type up a memo and email those out, director signs, the treasurer signs. So their approvals are already received in another way. So the first person it stops to is it's submitted to a program monitor. And they can review the attachments, the justifications, all that kind of stuff, make their decision. And if justification says partially approved, the final approver is the finance manager. So we would know it's going to be one of these 2 steps during the approval process. It'll either say submitted or partially approved. So if it says partially approved, we know we're waiting on the finance manager to give the approval for it to go on to accounts payable to become a check. Our emergency voucher request, we're starting to see that workflow get used a little more while we're out of the office. So we have a question on when do we use the justification workflow? And pretty much there's maybe 2 main instances that we use a justification. If we've requested a purchase order for $100 and we got the invoice and the invoice far exceeds our purchase order, so that maybe the invoice is $150, we would have to use a justification explaining why we exceeded the amount of our estimate for our expense. whatever the reason would be. And the other would be if we hadn't received any approval in advance of any purchase. So if we went ahead and went to All Stop, put fuel in a vehicle or purchased stuff for a meeting, that kind of stuff, and after the fact we're asking approval, we'd have to use the justification workflow. So we have the emergency voucher request. The users are same stuff every time. So for those of us who are using purchasing to be the person who's submitting this stuff, that stuff never changes on your end. But what we see in the emergency workflow is the first person this goes to actually is the CFO. And typically we use these on like the weekends or during outside of like normal business hours. This gives the CFO awareness that there's been a request for a check to be issued immediately, but it also lets them get the people from finance ready that have to be involved in actually producing the check. Whether it's someone from accounts payable to print the check, another employee to be available to go to the building to pick it up to issue it to whoever the program is requesting it. So the CFO gets the first notification. So it's submitted when it's with the CFO. After the CFO approves, that changes to partially approved. And we can see the gold highlight, meaning it could be one of two things. It's either with a program monitor or it's with the finance manager. And so when the monitor approves and moves to the finance manager, it still says partially approved. When Lynette approves, and that means it's been fully approved at that point, the status of that document actually changes to closed. And that means it's no longer in a purchasing workflow. It's moved on out of purchasing into accounts payable. So now we would know that the check is on its way to becoming printed, that we've gone through all the steps necessary in purchasing to get a check ready. And we've got two more workflows. We have the voucher workflow, and a voucher is what a purchase order or a contract services purchase order is converted into. And so our vouchers always go to the program monitor first. So when it's submitted, that status means it's with our monitor. If they approve, that changes to partially approved, and now that means it's sitting with the finance manager. She approves, that status changes to closed, and it's now out of purchasing and into accounts payable. So if we have a question about where our voucher stands in terms of purchasing, we can go and look at the voucher workflow, and we'd have an immediately recognizable place to tell us where is our request. So if I change our INTACCT side to look at a voucher, we can see here the first 20 or so requests. We have a lot of things that are submitted, so they're waiting for approval from the monitor. And then we got a handful of things that are closed, meaning they've gone to accounts payable. So if we were any of the programs that had the closed stuff, we would know we've done all we can now on purchasing side. We're waiting for a check, or a check has been printed. Then we have the non-PO voucher workflow. This is where typically like our employees' mileage requests are done, or for the community services uses this for like their medical trips. There's that type of assistance. So in the non-PO voucher workflow, it first goes to a program director, so it would say submitted. When they approve, that moves to the monitor. And so that's going to say partially approved for one of two approvers, for the monitor or the finance manager. Once they've given their approvals, that's out of purchasing and into accounts payable, so that state changes to closed. So we would know by looking at any of these purchase states who that thing is sitting with. So let's take a look at the purchasing document states. And so if we click on states here, that's actually going to take us to the INTACCT page that actually describes what all the states mean. So this would be a good reference here with a document I put on my website. And so it's a lot to see, but so the draft is the transaction that's been saved as a draft, meaning you or someone else that has the same access as you is able to see that something's been prepared, but it hasn't been submitted yet. If something says that it's in progress, it means the transaction's been converted to another transaction type, and that transaction's in there as a draft. So as an example, if we converted a purchase order into a voucher and saved the voucher as a draft, the system sets the purchase order to in progress, and the voucher would say draft. This basically freezes our purchase order. So if we do this to any of our blanket purchase orders or our blanket contracts, where we're going to use that multiple times for payments at different points along the way, if we save the voucher as a draft, it's locked that purchase order, so we can't do any more work with it. So if we're in there and we're looking for that and we can't figure out what to do, we would know that the voucher or the next document after the purchase order is sitting as a draft, and we have to do something about that. We can go and edit that draft and submit it if it's a payment that we need to take care of, or we need to delete the document so it sets the purchase order back into a pending or partially converted status. If we see the pending state, that tells us the transaction's available to convert into the next transaction step. Partially converted means that the transaction was converted to another transaction type, but at least one of the line items was not completed. You know, if we did a purchase order with a line item quantity of 20, and we convert it into an invoice, and we change the line item quantity to 10 and post it, it'll say partially converted because we still have 10 of the quantity available for future reference, and that's basically the blanket purchase order or the blanket contract. If a document says converted, it means it's been converted into another transaction type and all the line items are completed. Typically, we'll see that at a standard purchase requisition, contract service requisition, or the purchase orders. Converted documents can't be edited because it's been moved into a different workflow down the stream of INTACCT. If it's closed, that means the payment request has been approved and sent to accounts payable. Submitted, meaning it's been submitted for approval and it's waiting for the first person in the approval workflow to approve. And then we have declined, which means it's been declined at some point in purchasing transaction approval process. So you can find that on my website, or you can go to the INTACCT help guide. I don't know if many users now are using the help guide. Is there anyone that's listening now that uses the INTACCT help guide? Okay. If you're not using that, there's a little help and support button up in the upper right corner of INTACCT. When we click that, it's going to ask if you want help on the page. So if we're in somewhere specific, it'll give us more information about the page. Popular questions related to the page we're on. So we can see if I go to Popular Solutions, it talks about converting a purchase transaction, converting part of one, printing or emailing documents, that kind of stuff. Or you can just go to Help Center. And when you do that, that's basically the entire INTACCT help guide. And so they have their topics that you can go into and search for something, or like in the purchasing states. If I type that, it'll start to give us results that we can look through, which is the same page I've linked on my training document and copy and paste it into the slide. It's a pretty helpful tool. So if you ever have time or you have questions, that's a good place to go. So the purchasing history tab for approval history, so I've talked about the partially approved. That can be multiple people. If we're in the contract workflow, that could mean 1 of 4 people. So that might not be very helpful to see partially approved. Maybe we want to know who it's with so we can contact that person to get the document moved along, or to find out, is there something that's keeping them from taking action on it, that kind of stuff. So you can see a summary of reviewing by clicking the view to view the transaction. You can see a chronological listing of the most recent activity on top. You can tab to history. So when I go into INTACCT, still in the vouchers workflow, there's the state here. You can click on this. Or if reviewing a document, up top there's a history tab. So when I go to history, I can see the history of the document chronologically here. So we can see that this voucher is tied to this purchase order, which is tied to this purchase requisition. You can see the states of those things here. And right here is an approval history tab. And we can click that to start to see exactly where a document might be sitting and some more information about the actual approvers involved. So I've got an example here. And so here's the screenshot where we can see the approval step, step 1 and 2. So this workflow requires 2 people to approve. The rule type, that means the type of approver. So for our monitors, when it says, it'll say value approval for program monitor. That's the INTACCT moniker for that we can't change, so that's what it says. Or it might say user level when it's a specific person. So we specifically identify Lynette in this workflow as an approver. You can see approver levels. Typically, they all say 1. At each step, there's only 1 approver required. If someone had been delegated in that person's role, their name would be here. So if Lynette had delegated Frida to be her approver while she was on vacation or something, Frida's name would be here if she was the delegated person waiting to approve. So if we're looking up this purchase and we go to our approval history and we see that name there, we would know Lynette's not the person that it's actually waiting for. It's actually waiting for her delegate. Once it's approved or declined, their name fills in here. So even though over here it says value approval, once a monitor approves, Tracy's name or Diana's name, whoever's approving is going to get filled in here. And if they have comments, it'll fill in here at the end. Now the state we can see, once that's submitted, once it's pending approval. So it happens to match what the document purchasing state would be. So it's been submitted to the first person, and so the document state would also say submitted. And we know it's pending approval from Lynette. So it hasn't reached her desk yet. It's waiting for that first person to take action before she has an opportunity to take action. If there's multiple people, we might see approved, or we can see declined too if we're looking up the decline history, or we can see comments why someone declined a document. So hopefully whoever's declining something will make a note about why they've declined it so we can get that into record and people can understand why it's been declined. And so with the 2 approvers required here, it goes back to the workflow I've stated. We have vouchers and justification workflows that this could be from, since there's only 2 people that are required to approve in INTACCT for those workflows. So we have a second example here. So we can see there's 5 approval steps. It starts with the department approver. The second step is the value approval, which is the program monitor. And then we have 3 user level approvals. Number 3 says Myrna Knox, who's the CFO. Number 4 says Steven Denoyer, who's the treasurer. And number 5 says Scott Herman, who's the vice president. And so as we see that someone has taken action on step 1, some information is filled in, unlike in the first example we have where no action's been taken. So the program approver, this is for WIC. So we have the approver's name here, the user ID. The subject 164, that's their program number. So we can see her name filled in. She approved that on May 21st. And so that says approved. And so we know from earlier, the document would not say approved. The document's going to say partially approved. And when we click in here, we can now see exactly who the document's been submitted to and through the approval workflow. So it says submitted on the line with the program monitor. So if someone from WIC or Missy wanted to check to see where this document's sitting or what the holdup is, by going into the approval history tab, she would know it's who it's sitting with exactly and can reach out to that person to say or inquire why isn't a document been approved. And then we can see it's pending the approval of the last 3 people in the workflow because it hasn't reached them yet. So we've got 2 questions down here. If anyone knows the answer, put them in the chat room. Just looking at this approval workflow, does anyone know which purchasing workflow this is? Okay, this is the contract service requisition workflow with the 5 approvers that's required. And what state would the document have if the first person that it's been submitted to has approved it, but the others haven't? That's the partially approved would be the state of this document. A third example of another workflow is approval step 1, which is the department approver. Approver step 2, value approval or the program monitor. And approval step 3, user level, and that identifies Lynette. So we can see that for line 1 says approved by the program director. Line 2 is approved by one of the monitors, and line 3 is approved by Lynette. So based on just the approval workflow, is anyone able to identify which workflow this is? It's the non-PO voucher workflow. And the document state for this, we've got all 3 approvals. So we know submitted is not going to be one of them, declined will not be one of them, partially approved will not be one. It's a non-PO voucher, it's got all the approvals. The state of this document will say closed. All right. So any questions on the approval stuff? All right. Now we're going to go into purchasing lists to create our own custom views. So I did the same thing. I linked custom view. So if you look at the document on my website or download it to a computer, if you click on custom view, it's going to take us to the INTACCT help guide that tells us how to add a custom view and walk you through the steps. So you can create custom views in the purchasing workflows. You can do it in financial reports, not in the report center, but in a different area for financial reports. You can do it for general ledger journal entries, general ledger accounts. You can do it in order entry. So for those people who are using INTACCT to do your own internal billing, you can create customized views at your invoices or your quotes. And you can also do it in accounts receivable. So the way a list is arranged or filtered or sorted is called a view. INTACCT provides standard views for us. for displaying list items or recently viewed or modified list items. In addition, you can create your own custom view to display list items the way you need to see them. So, mouthful to say, and it's a 5-step process. And what we're going to do is we're going to get out of the slides now. We're going to go into INTACCT. And I'm going to create a custom view in the voucher transactions area. So we're going to go to vouchers. So when we talk about views, and depending on whichever workflow you're using, if you haven't ever used one of the custom views that I've created for people, or if you've done one yourself, right here underneath the name of the area that you're in, it typically says all, unless you're using one of the available workflow views. And so when you're at all, this is a standard default view that INTACCT provides to you. And while you can get information from it, for me, when I log in to the vouchers area, we have 45,000, or almost at 46,000 vouchers. So probably before this day is over, we'll cross 46,000 vouchers. So if we're in the finance office, an all type of view may not be helpful. Or if you're wanting to only see the stuff that's waiting for approval or stuff that's been closed, there's other things we can do to customize this stuff. So what you can do is you go to Manage Views, and you can create a new view. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Create New View. And the first step it wants us to do is it wants us to select columns. And so if I come back out to the voucher workflow, each one of these areas, type, document number, reference, all these things, they're all columns. So when it's asking to select a column, it's asking us, what information do you want to build across your voucher view? And it defaults to what INTACCT's default look is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use document number, which will give us the voucher number, the state, which will tell us submitted, closed, partially approved, whatever that would be, the name of the vendor. Typically, we want to know who we're trying to pay, so this view is going to help us. The date, which means the date of the transaction, not the date it was approved or anything like that, just the date the transaction was dated. I'm not going to use the reference number in this one, but I am going to use converted from, total, and I do not want the transaction type. We know it's a voucher. And so I've got 6 different columns ordered. You can choose a variety of columns. We can't choose from the line item view, so like program, funding source, checkbook, that kind of stuff, account number. That's not available to us in creating these views. It's everything on what's called the header document, so the stuff on the upper half of our request. So you can come through here and look at if it's been paid, the payment status. So if we were wanting to know if our closed stuff had been paid or not, we can include payment status. But for now, I've got document number, state, vendor name, date, total, converted from. So that's the columns I'm going to build into my view. And you want to be careful about adding too much. If you add too many columns, you'll have to scroll your screen left and right. So if you're not comfortable with that, use some limited information. So now I'm going to click the arrows to move on to our second step. And the second step is allow us to select our column sequence. What orders do we want to read the columns from left to right? So starting at the top, this is our furthest left, most left document or column going down. So if we wanted to start with the date as the first column we want to see, so we can see in my mouse symbol is just the typical arrow that I use. But when you come up here into these areas, we get these little 4 cross arrows. So if I click and drag on something, I can drag it to the top and let it go. And now we have date will show up first. We have document number. Maybe I want vendor name to show up after our document number, and converted from to be the last document. We can also rename these fields. Document number is kind of long. So maybe I just wanted to say an abbreviated version of document number. We can get rid of vendor name and just have vendor. So you can name these columns whatever you want. Basically, that's alphanumeric. Special symbols might come across weird, so just stick to letters and numbers. So now I've put in a sequence of how I want my view to look. We move to our next step, which is filtering. So this is probably the most complicated part of creating your own view, is setting in a filter, meaning, do we want to see information different than everything that will show up? If I set no filter on this right now, everything in the vouchers workflow is still going to come up, those 46,000 documents. So for this one, we want to see what's happening in our fiscal year. So I'm going to change this column from none to date. I want to filter based on a date. And if I use equals and put in a date, that's just going to give us anything that's happened on a specific date. And there's a bunch of different options. Less than, so if I put in less than and use today's date, any voucher that is dated before today would show up. Greater than, if I use today's date for greater than, any voucher created tomorrow and so on will continue. Lesser equal, greater equal, a handful of others. So I'm going to use greater or equal. And I'm going to put in the first day of our fiscal year. So 10/1/2019. So if you go on to use this to create your own view, when you use a date, make sure you use it in the format I'm using, which is you got the forward slashes separating the month, day, and year, and the year needs to be 4 digits. If we use a 2-digit year, it's going to cause an error with how INTACCT reads dates. So make sure we use 4 digits. And so now I'm saying I want to see all the vouchers that happened on 10/1/19 or any date greater than 10/1/19. So fiscal year 20. And for this particular, well, maybe I only want to see vouchers that came from contracts. So I can add a second filter. I'm going to say converted from. We don't want to use the equals because it's going to want the exact number of a contract service PO. But maybe in this one, I'm going to use starts with. So anything that starts with the word contract that happened from 10/1/19 or on, I want to come up in this view. You can add as many filters as you'd want. And as you can see here, they're all and filters. So for people who have experience in Excel, you can choose and or. In this particular thing, you can only choose and. So it has to be beyond 10/1/19 or later, and it has to start with the word contract in the converted from field. So we're going to go to step 4. And this is where we get to select how we want our results to be sorted. So if I wanted to sort this by the vendor name, our columns will still stay in the order they're in, but now we're sorting the information that's going to fill in those columns. I'm going to drag vendor name to the top. And I can choose ascending or descending. Ascending meaning alphabetical order, descending meaning reverse alphabetical. So I'm going to use ascending. I want this A to Z. And maybe the next thing I want to do is sort it by date, also in ascending order. So starting with the oldest document and going to the newest document for each vendor. You can dig even deeper into the sorting the results if you wanted to align these however you want and then choose ascending or descending. I'm just going to use just those first two. And we'll move on to our final step. A name is required. So I'm going to call it training voucher from contract. The name has to be unique. So whatever name you give it, one, make sure it makes sense, but two, it has to be unique. So once I save this, if any user tried to use the same name I used, you would get an error message saying that name's already been taken. You need a unique value. So make sure you use something that will make sense to you and that probably won't be duplicated. The next step is ask if you want to deploy it or not. Please do not check mark deploy. If you check mark deploy, it makes it available to everybody, which is fine. Maybe you put together a great view and other people can use it. But if everyone in this room created a new voucher view and click deploy, we're going to have about 10 new views in our list that most of us have no idea what they're for. So just don't use deploy. That way only you can see it. And then you can add a description if you want to help remind you whatever it is that you were trying to accomplish with your workflow or with your view. So these two areas aren't required, so I'm going to leave them blank. And now I'm going to click save. So we're going to come back out to vouchers. I'm still stuck on the default one. So when I click on all, I can see where the new view is that I created. Now we can take a look and use that date column. I changed document number to doc number, and then I accidentally clicked on doc, so it's going to reorder this stuff. We have vendor, the total amount, the status of the request, and then the document it came from. So we took this from 46,000 documents to 533. So if we're using contracts, as I use this one as an example, if we're using contracts and we wanted to only follow up on our payments for contracts through vouchers, here we are. I've sorted out any other type of payment request that's not related to voucher or not related to a purchase order. This is all strictly from contracts. And then if we've seen the view, there's more information that we wanted to have, or there's less information we wanted to see, you can always go up to manage, click on edit, and add or remove information. Change the order of our columns. So maybe we don't want the converted from, it was making the columns too big. So we want converted from not to be present. So I can uncheck that box. And click on save. So now converted from is not here, but my filter still stayed intact. We still have 533 documents. So we can filter on any column. The column is not required to be viewable in our custom view. And so now we have 5 columns to view. We can export this if we wanted to do more work, or we can further dive into this. Now that we have this, maybe we only want those things that haven't been paid, that kind of stuff. Any questions on creating a custom view? Okay, so you can do this in any purchasing workflow. I've created this one in Voucher. So it's not going to be available in other purchasing workflows. So you would have to create one specifically for voucher, one for purchase order, one for non-PO voucher, whichever ones you wanted to do this with or explore. As I was saying, you can do it with reports. So if I went to reports, but instead of the report center, I went to this one, financial reports. So this already comes to an area that I'm using a special view. If we go back to all, which is probably what majority of users will see, you see a list of all the reports by name, the different formats you can download it in, and maybe there's only specific types of reports you want to see available. So like the fiscal year reports or the life to date, that kind of stuff. And so like I have some here based on the ones that show all funding sources, just a budget view, and direct cost reports, one funding source view. So if I click that, these are all the reports that show one funding source. Payroll reports, just a variety of different ones. You could go here and build your own to just look for the ones that you use all the time, or that would make sense to you if you wanted to do that with financial reports. You can do that in order entry. If you were wanting to sort your stuff in a certain way, by date or by status, whether or not you've received payment, that kind of deal. But that's it for me. Unless we have any more questions, thank you all for your time. We're just about at 50 minutes, so this would be a good time for us to end the training. And if you have anything else or you want to help on a custom view, shoot me an email. And at some point, I'll be recording a video and just doing a custom view to add to the website too. All right, have a good day, everybody.